Welcome to Well Published. It's nice to see people are joining. While you're joining, I'll just start with the introduction. Welcome to Well Published, the live Substack series where we talk about all aspects of getting and being well published. My name is Aimee Liu, and I'm an author, ghostwriter, and veteran MFA professor. My Substack is MFA Lore, where I offer the essence of an MFA education in creative writing minus the tuition. Our topic today is writing fellowship, and my guest is fellow Substacker, author, and Professor Christine Sneed.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thank you, Aimee, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm delighted to have you here. People are still joining, so while you're joining, I'll introduce Christine, whose fiction includes the novels Please Be Advised, a novel in memos, Little Known Facts, and Paris, He Said, and the story collections Portraits of a Few of the People I've Made Cry, and The Virginity of Famous Men. She's also the editor of the short fiction anthology Love in the Time of Time's Up, and her seventh book, Direct Sunlight, is a short story collection published in 2023 by Northwestern University Press. Christine lives in Pasadena, California, not that far away from me, and teaches for the graduate writing program at Northwestern University in the School of Professional Studies and for Stanford University Continuing Studies. Her Substack, Bookish, focuses on literary and literature adjacent topics, including the craft of writing, the publishing and entertainment industries, and making a life as a writer. Welcome again, Christine.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel sort of guilty for those of you who aren't in part of the world where Aimee and I are, because I have a lot of family and friends in Chicago, and it's about 1 degree with the wind chill. So
Yeah.
I know the rest of the country, or a lot of the country, is experiencing real winter, or at least cold winter. Since we
Yeah,
ever
I
feel winter
know.
different.
The pictures that are coming up on Substack of these icy trees and everything, I remember it from growing up in Connecticut, but it does seem so foreign to us here. Okay, so our conversation today is the first in what I hope will become a series of chats with fellow authors who helm stacks on creative writing and the writing life. I find that the wealth of these publications can be overwhelming to those of us who are reading them and trying to sort out which are of interest to us. And it's also the competition for attention can be equally challenging for writers. But I also feel like this is an incredibly generous space with so much high level expertise. And that it's a gold mine, really, for writers and for writing students. Most of us offer different insights and services. So, my aim with you today, Christine, is to talk about what connects us and what differentiates our Substacks, and also just chatting about our different MFA and writing journeys. So, why don't you kick things off by telling us about your inspiration and goals for Bookish?
Well, again, thank you for inviting me. And you're right. I do find that Substack is such a generous community. And I was inspired to join it back in March of 2023 when I was at the AWP conference in Seattle. And I spoke with a Substacker and a poet named Sean Singer, who um, has the distinction of having won the Yale Younger Poets Book Prize when he was about 25. And he's now quite a bit older. I met him in the 90s when he was an undergraduate and I was an MFA student at Indiana University in poetry. So he and I were talking at AWP, and I was saying, even though I had a book come out in the previous fall, the novel and memos that you mentioned with 713 Books, which is a really great independent press, I was, frustrated, having previously published with Bloomsbury, that, mid-list authors, um, it's a struggle to get, the discoverability is always an issue. And I had friends and I had students and family members who had been reading my books and buying them, but I still felt very distant in a way from my identity as a writer, despite teaching and publishing in literary magazines as well as publishing books. That I felt sort of like, as I've said elsewhere, I needed a new address in Writerland, or I didn't even actually feel like I had an address in Writerland. So Sean said, just try Substack. You might as well. And he had been doing it, I think, he'd been writing his poetry centric newsletter for 2 years, about 2 years by that point. And he had a really good subscriber base. And he was also earning a, pretty decent amount of money for a side project. And so because he teaches poetry as well. And his most recent book, Today in the Taxi, won the Jewish National Book Award a couple of years ago. It's this great book of prose poems because for a long time, to earn money, I don't think he was teaching enough or didn't have enough teaching income. He started driving an Uber in New York City. And he did that for several years up until the pandemic. So anyway, that's a long tangent, but I was just really intrigued by how he was so dexterous about figuring out how to pay his bills. And along with the Uber and the poetry, the Substack job, quote unquote job, it turned out to be a great thing. And it has expanded his base, I guess you could say, of fans. And he just said, try it. And so he and I met on Zoom and he showed me a few of the, behind the scenes, the platform, how to use different aspects of it and just figure out how to post your first newsletter. So he also said, if you're going to be paywalling, you have to be pretty, what's the word I'm thinking? He organized about it, and you have to be practical or pragmatic about it in the sense that you don't want to paywall everything. I mean, if you're famous, okay, probably you'll have a ready-made group of subscribers. Salman Rushdie, I don't think, was struggling to get subscriptions. And when Elizabeth Gilbert joined recently too, she probably had thousands of who signed up immediately. But anyway, that's a long tangent. It was just, it was his encouragement to give it a shot. And then I felt immediately excited about writing posts and thinking of ideas. But he also said, you want to do something that you're actually interested in and that you have some knowledge about. So try to figure out where you're going to stake your claim. So I knew, I'm like, well, I'm a writer and I teach creative writing and I have taught literature classes. I might as well just focus on books and the writing life.
Do you see it as kind of an extension of your teaching or as something different?
I do see it as an extension, actually, because I often refine craft lessons that I've written in the past for some of my graduate classes. I teach for the MFA program at Northwestern. They have 2 MFA programs, and I actually teach for the original one. The newer one got this enormous endowment, so it's a much smaller program, and it's great. They can fully fund their students, and they think they just admit about 4 or 5 or 6 a year. And anyway, now I forget. I'm going off on these tangents.
Teaching subset. Yeah. I mean, I find that because I left teaching, my college closed sort of right after the pandemic, and so I stopped after teaching for 15 years in the Goddard MFA program. I left and I just concentrated on other things. And so I haven't gone back, but I miss it. And so Substack has since become sort of my extended teaching career. And a lot of my students are still, following me on Substack. And so that's what it does for me. That's why I call it the essence of an MFA education, because it is for me. Yeah.
I love your posts. I actually have used some of your prompts in my classes because
that's nice to hear.
Yeah, I attribute them to you. So I'm not stealing them, but
that's great.
Yeah, I hope that's led to a few people finding their way to your Substack. But they're terrific because I think you sent one out yesterday too. Is that right?
Welcome. Yeah.
All the questions you have for the writers to consider when they're working on the prompt. And, I think I heard Josh Moore say this on Brad Listy's podcast, other people, that, he's always interested in C as in character. And I find that with your prompts too. You're great about bringing character to the fore. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to. There's really regardless of whether you're writing about dragons or people, character is foundational for prose, certainly for poetry too, of course.
Yeah. No, I've had a lot of fun with that. It was actually, it's funny because I don't generally use prompts in my own writing, but I know that a lot of students really like them. What I didn't expect was that I now do sort of an introduction to the prompt, which is sort of my own free writing around the prompt. So I'm falling into it and I'm doing the prompts myself, getting ready to write the prompt. So it's kind of fun.
I
Um,
I don't use them much either, but I have gotten ideas actually. Sometimes when I assign them to students, and I'm like, oh, I'll write in my notebook. Oh, I want to write a story about this idea that came from a prompt.
yeah.
But
The other thing that I find is that when I do the prompt, um, I'm conscious of how frequently and I think most of us approach topics from one dimension. And so when I write out the prompt, I'm very conscious of trying to think of all the different dimensional ways you can get into the topic. So to widen the lens and vary the perspective, and all of that, which I think is really the essence of what fine writing is. That it doesn't take just one view of anything. It looks at everything from around the world, kind of. So that's that. How do you decide what to write about, and what
for
what
book
yeah, for bookish, and what distinguishes the your Substack, for example, from the others that are out there? As I said, there's so many.
I think I really took Sean's early advice. Sean Singer, if you are just joining, I'm referring to his poetry Substack. And I can't remember the name of it. Of course, I'm drawing a blank, but his name is Sean, Sean Singer. And he I guess that, he just said you want it to be a reflection of who you are and also of your interests. And so I have balanced it mostly. Initially, it was I was doing author interviews, which I still do, as you doubtless do. You know, a lot of writers,
Mhm.
and many of them are publishing with university or small presses, independent presses. And as I mentioned before, discoverability is a chronic problem because also bookstores don't often, unfortunately, carry small press books. So unless you have a
Mhm.
relationship with them and, they'll carry your book because you shop there or you've done events there, it's your hometown, etc. So I do a lot of interviews with authors. I have one going out on Friday with a
Mhm.
writer who's Chinese, and she left China. Her name is Ruyan Meng, but it's actually a pen name because she left China due to political persecution years ago, many years ago. And so I mentioned 713 books earlier.
Mhm.
Her book, The Morgue Keeper, is based in part on her father, who did work in a morgue in China during the Cultural Revolution. So I'm
Wow.
publishing that interview Friday. And, that's an example of a very good book that got almost no publicity. And in part, it's, due to the fact that she can't reveal her identity. So she can't do public
Oh,
events.
wow. Yeah.
So, it's doubly problematic if you're a writer and can't, expose yourself to the public eye. And then I also do um, craft lessons occasionally, or sort of, I don't do a ton of personal essays. I feel sort of I think some of it is I just feel like my voice comes across as silly, or I don't know. I mean, I unless I'm writing straight up satire or something, which I did do in some of my early posts, like a spoof of a conversation that many writers might have with Chat GPT, which expose all of our
Mhm.
neuroses.
Mhm.
Like, for example, the person asks Chat GPT, is it normal if I'm on a road trip and I drive 100 miles off course to see if a bookstore is carrying my books? Stuff like that, where we all can identify with that impulse if we're traveling and we're hoping our book is in a bookstore and it's not. So,
Yeah.
I just initially was thinking of it as a place to talk about the realities of being a writer and also poke fun at myself, and then foreground and highlight other literary people. So and that's kind of what it's continued to be. Um, and I mean,
So,
you're focused mostly on the craft of writing. And then you also post very meaningfully about public events and
yeah,
political implications of, the political implications on our life as writers in this,
yeah.
which has not been a happy one.
No, I mean, my journey on Substack is interesting. I started it just about 5 years ago. And I had been on Medium. By the way, this will be recorded and we'll release the video and a recap tomorrow. So I saw in the chat that somebody needed to go teach, but the video will be out tomorrow. But when I started, I had been on Medium, and that's a whole different world. And I highly recommend everybody who's trying to get their Substack going to go take a look at Medium and consider cross posting your pieces there, because I get a lot of subscribers from Medium.
Oh,
Um,
I
yeah,
didn't
I
know.
have a whole strategy which I've written about. I have some stacks about doing both. Um, but you can be very strategic about it so that you don't, just automatically post everything in both places. You can siphon it out. But I like you, just somebody started talking about Medium and I was curious about it. And then I joined at a time when they were trying to grow the platform, and they were doing these very generous 2-3 month long group sessions where you would meet with other Substackers once a week, on Zoom, and everybody pooled their resources, and it was wonderful way to get up to speed. So that's really what got me going. And in the beginning, I thought of it as a place to try out personal essays. You talk about not writing your own creative work. I started out putting my creative work on there to kind of test ideas, because I've been forever and a day writing essays about my Chinese American family and heritage and all of that. And I did that for several months, and it was fun. But I think then I realized that I took a couple of the Substack sessions and realized that if I was going to grow it, I needed to be offering my readers something. And I think everybody's got different views and intentions, but if I was going to charge money, I felt like I had to offer something to my subscribers, and that would have been my teaching stuff and writing, um, and as I say, I missed teaching, so that's where it went. And then the craft of writing, kind of took over everything else, and I got sideswiped by a couple of ghostwriting jobs that took me away from the creative. So then I ended up just using that. So that's been great because I've written several pieces on ghostwriting and publishing at the very top of the food chain with a major, big five publisher and what happens there. Uh, like you, I've got experience at both ends of the publishing spectrum. So it's always interesting to look at, what kind of advice you can give people at all stages. But I have found, and I wonder if you ever develop ideas on your Substack for other publications, things that could be developed into essays for LitHub or for literary journals or even for your creative work. Does that ever happen, or is it pretty much siloed separately?
It's interesting you asked that. I was thinking about that because last Thursday I taught a Substack class, a how-to for a friend who's also on Substack. Her name's Melissa Frederigo. She's a fiction writer and essayist. And um, I, you know, I was actually asked to write about creating a Substack for the Writers Chronicle, AWP's
Hmm.
now online publication. They used to do the print version, but they're exclusively online for reasons you can imagine. But so I'm going to turn that class into an article, but also write a bit more about what I was talking about with you earlier, just why the rationale behind joining Substack 3 years ago. But I one thing I've thought about, I was going to ask you about this too, because I know I mentioned Salman Rushdie earlier. He published one of his novels on Substack a few years ago
Oh,
as a serial, I think,
wow.
if I'm not mistaken. And I have a number of unpublished novels at this point that I've contemplated publishing one of them as a separate Substack. So, I mean, that is sort of not really answering your question directly about turning some of my posts into pieces that I expand on and publish elsewhere. But it is really interesting because I've seen a few posts from other writers who, for example, there's this guy, I can't remember his name now, but Rust Belt,
Mm-hmm.
Belt Publishing published, I think, Anne Trubeck, who writes a really good
Mm-hmm.
Notes from a Small Press, I think is the name of her Substack.
Yeah.
She ended up reading his novel on Substack and liking it so much that she offered him a traditional book contract. So
Yeah.
she, even though it had already been serialized on Substack, I think it was, it had a paywall for each of the, probably most of the posts, not the initial one, I'm guessing. But he ended up getting a book deal from publishing. But, he's someone who's a qualified writer. He's not writing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's not like he's just writing on his blog and,
Right.
you know,
Right. I
so,
mean, we all put a lot of work into our
yes.
pieces. It's not like we just toss them off. I mean, so.
I think those of us who also publish books and we teach, we
Yeah.
understand that this is a public forum and you don't want to put a face forward that is is going to embarrass you.
Yeah. Exactly. But a lot of literary journals won't consider anything that's been published even in part on Substack. Correct? I mean, that's my understanding.
I think so. I mean, I think most journals that, ones that are sending their issues into the Best American anthologies, for example, they don't want you to have pre-published work that, will appear on the pages of the Missouri Review, for example. But I mean, I really do have sort of, maybe it's because I'm in my 50s and I still am sort of old school in some ways when it comes to writing and publishing. I really have kind of a strict division between what I put on my Substack and what I do separately. Like I just finished a novel. I finished revising a novel that I started 8 years ago, but I wrote the majority of it last year and then I edited it and revised it over the last couple months. So that book is, that to me is a very different object, or, obviously it's not tangible at this point, but it's a different entity than what I do for Bookish. And I suspect you feel that way about your books too.
Kind of. I mean, obviously everything I ghostwrite has to be completely separate. Although it creeps in some of the, I do find because as you said, I can tend to be a little political sometimes. Goddard was a place where the creative writing and the political side of just being a human being really meshed. And so we really focused on the whole writing life, which meant everything that you truly believe bleeds into your writing, and your writing bleeds into everything you truly believe. So
Mhm.
I do tend to get political at times, but I think that's all part and parcel of the same thing. I did start a separate Substack called Authors for Democracy when I
Oh,
realized that my
yeah.
political stuff was getting too far away from the craft of writing, and I tried to pull it over, but I cross pollinate occasionally. Um, but as far as my own creative work, I think. Um, yeah, I like I say, I started out posting personal essays or pieces of personal essays or drafts of personal essays. And then I think when I realized that literary journals would not publish them, that's when I pulled back on all of the personal creative writing that I was doing on Substack because I've been working on this collection for a long time, and I really need to get more of the pieces well published in journals in order to sort of pull the collection together. So
It's also,
that's what happened.
guessing it's
It's
nonfiction.
it it's creative nonfiction. It's all memoir essays. It was long saga. I tried to write it as a single whole memoir, and my agent basically helped me see that it didn't have a strong enough spine to hold it as a whole separate book. So then I pulled it apart, and I've now, forever been working on separate pieces of it as essays that are all linked together. So,
And actually,
that's
Melissa,
that.
who I mentioned earlier, she just came out with an essay collection from University of Nebraska Press, which has the Tobias Wolff series. I think he's the series editor, but I
Hmm.
believe they have another editor who actually does the work on the manuscript with the author. But you might check them out.
Yeah,
Her book called The Perils of Girlhood, and it just came out in September, I think it was. But yeah,
fantastic.
the University of Nebraska Press, Tobias Wolff's series, I believe it's all nonfiction, if I'm not mistaken, despite the fact he's, very well known for his shorts,
Yeah,
especially.
yeah,
But I mean, I think one of the things too, just to sort of return to what we put in our Substacks, and like one of the reasons why I do post mentions of the fact I'm constantly raging about what's happening in this country, but I do not put much of it in my bookish posts because I think I do mention, that it's not like we live in a vacuum. It's been a terrible week, or, a year ago, the fires in Los Angeles destroyed 16,000 structures and, displaced people and people died. I I think one of the things that keeps me sane is engaging with same. I think all of us here. I mean, I obviously can't speak with authority for anyone but myself, but we all just need something else. Like last night, my
yeah.
partner saw Marty Supreme, which I had been avoiding because I'm like 2.5 hours. It was so good, and it's
Oh, good.
completely nuts. It's just like this wild ride that goes off the track, and you're worried you're going to be thrown from the vehicle, and it's hilarious. And anyway, it just felt like such a relief and a release. So even though I am trying to do things that I feel have meaning, and I want to acknowledge what's happening with our country and other countries, I've found myself just really wanting to focus on like what it's such an overused term, but like what do I feel joyful about?
Yeah, yeah,
So I've been also trying to, as I said, help other writers get their books out. And I also worry, like, people don't want to hear more about me. Like, I feel somewhat sheepish about posting about it, but then I also feel like, well, I want people to read it. And I also want people to know so they can subscribe to these journals, so because they rely on word of mouth too.
hmm.
It's such a fine balance. Like, I don't, well, would you speak to that? Like, how do you balance your own PR with what else you do with your Substack?
Well, I think because of the ghostwriting, I've become really a deadline writer, which I didn't used to be. I used to be much more self-motivated and self-directed, and, I would create my own deadlines. But now I think, particularly in this climate, I mean, I was writing a note this morning about it. I find that living in the United States right now is like trying to write in your journal with Chucky leering over your shoulder. I mean, that's how it feels every day. And especially if on my creative, anything personal, I feel, oh my God, he's right over there in the corner. What's he going to do next? How is he going to shut me down, do whatever he's going to
You know,
do.
you don't have to
But
worry. I mean, I'm curious.
uh,
Obviously other people do, but
I
anyway.
don't, I don't mean, I don't mean literally me. I just mean,
Right.
what's he going to ruin? What's he going to destroy? What's he going to threaten? It's kind of this presence, this menacing presence who's always there. But I find that that's much more distracting for my creative work, my personal work. That's why I say it's like writing in your journal. Whereas on Substack, the parameters are clear to me. The deadlines are clear. I post 3 times a week, and I have very clear things. I post the prompts on Monday, and on Wednesday I do Writer in the World, which are sort of curated, edited pieces that mostly other people write, and then I do my primary craft, um, or whatever, personal essay on Saturday, and that kind of keeps me. It, having those deadlines pulls me away from the news and gets me off the streaming treadmill. What I really am in awe with you is that you can keep your personal writing going, your creative work, your stories,
It's
novel fiction. I'd love to get back to fiction. It's been a long time since I wrote fiction. I think it's partly that living in this world, I find that I can't pull away from it or find a way to segue into fiction. It just doesn't seem relevant enough somehow to me. But I mean, other writers are different. They're able to pull it
I
all into their
I think
fiction.
that's something a lot of people struggle with. I find myself in fiction that I'm writing often having, referring to a lot of what's happening, but it's present day, but I'm not writing directly about politics. But it's clear and it would be clear to most people who read my books that I'm quite liberal. So it kind of is like this back door into the things that really interest me. And because the book that I just finished recently I'm querying agents because I've had several and two of them left the industry. And then the other four I just parted ways with. And for one reason or another, one of them is I'm still sort of connected to, but you know, I am querying now and it's I keep forgetting what I was going to say and then I have to find my way.
Writing about this
I
world and bringing it into your
to be
writing.
like that's really that's one of the things that's a perennial theme for me is kindness. Like money is great, but you need friends, you need something to care about. And I also this new book has a bookstore in it and I just I'm just sort of at this point because of being a mid-list author, which for those of you who aren't sure what that is, it's not a bestseller. It's not someone who's only sold a handful of copies. I've been published by a big corporate press. I have 4 books with Bloomsbury, but I was never a bestseller. So then publishing my subsequent books, I had to go with small presses or indie presses, or in the case of my story collection, Northwestern University Press under the imprint Tri-Quarterly Books. But the thing is, as I was saying at the very beginning of our conversation, it's really hard to get your books in bookstores. Even if you're with a big press, you have to be a lead title in most cases, which is each quarter, big publishers anoint a title of nonfiction and fiction that they're going to put most of their marketing and publicity muscle behind. So as another Substacker on here, Kathleen Schmidt, has said many times, and she's worked in the publishing industry for more than 2 decades, there's just too many books being published. So that's another problem. But, the irony, of course, is that there's more writers than ever and there's more writing programs than ever, it seems. Obviously,
Yeah.
Goddard is probably 5 other writing programs mushroomed after Goddard exited. So it's just, we have to be entrepreneurial as well as creative, which is one great thing about Substack.
Yeah.
I keep going off on all these tangents.
No, that's great. It's a great segue because I wanted to talk about writing fellowship, which was one of our primary topics for this. And I find that having a community of writers in my life, aside from just being essential for my sanity and for my social life, it's also really good for publishing, for your publishing life and your books. I know that my last novel came out with Red Hen Press, and unfortunately, it came out right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we had all sorts of communal events planned, book events across the
Oh,
country with
has to be the
other.
full
Hmm?
probably. Yeah. LA Times Book Festival, all that was canceled in 2020.
Everything was canceled. Yeah. But we still did a number of Zoom events that I did in tandem with other writers who had books in the same pub. In fact, we set up a group called Lockdown Lit, which was a part of boosting each other's numbers and providing each other with moral support and giving advice on, Zoom events and introducing each other to different book groups who were online book groups. I mean, having a community of writers during the pandemic was, to the small survival kind of numbers that I had for the book came out largely as a credit to all of the other writers who kind of helped me and who I helped. And much of my writing life developed after I got my MFA. I got my MFA at Bennington. And so between the faculty that I worked with and the writers that I worked with and the writers who have subsequently come out, I mean, that's a huge part of my writing life. And then the other big part of my writing life is my writing group, which Colette Sartar is the head of. We have a mutual friend. We have so many mutual friends, which is a testament to kind of how tight the community of writers is. But speak to what that all means in your life.
Well, it's really, it's so crucial to keeping yourself from despair at times, and also just being part of a group of like-minded people who care deeply about books too, and the process of writing, and the insecurities and the uncertainties and the fact there's no guarantee, um, that you're going to have the career that you envision for yourself. I think one of the things that happened in my case was my first book, um, I had an agent in the early aughts, and then she had tried to sell a story collection, which back in the aughts, you could still sometimes sell collections. I mean, you still can, but it's a different uh, world now. And she didn't sell it. And then I wrote a novel, which I don't even know. I don't remember if she went out on submission with it. But then a friend at DePaul in Chicago, when I was teaching at DePaul and Loyola before I ended up teaching at Northwestern and then moving to Pasadena, he said, "Why don't you just enter some book contests?" And so I entered a different story collection in the AWP's Grace Paley Prize in 2009, and I won. And then which was a miracle, because I had entered 3 other contests too. And in 2 of them, I didn't place. I didn't even make it to like the long list. And then one of them I just withdrew. And it's just so much. I mean, like, don't think, I mean, I think, yes, I'm capable and I can write well enough that people actually want to read my stuff. But I also know luck has an enormous part to do with every writer's career. For the most part, I would say that's probably 98 or 99% true. We might have we might have great talent. We might just be, doing all the right things. But the difference between someone whose book suddenly gets an enormous amount of buzz and someone who is maybe a better writer, if a certain number of qualified critics judged, gets like 10 readers. So it's one of the things too that tangentially Virginia Evans, whose book The Correspondent came out, and now it's the creme de la creme, or it's really getting an enormous amount of attention. That, interestingly, I think she wrote several other books before she was able to get an agent, and then they sold this book, The Correspondence, which is her debut, but it's by no means her first novel. And I was actually really happy to hear that, because I feel like one of the things that's often hard, especially as a writing professor and someone who teaches community classes too, that people think like, well, I wrote this book, so I've got to publish it. And I'm kind of like, no, there's no guarantee. Yes, you can self-publish it, but that doesn't mean just because you wrote it, someone will want to publish it. And I know
That it should be
yeah,
published.
yeah, exactly. Like, and I know from my unpublished novels, which 2 of which my Bloomsbury editor attempted to acquire, but because of my sales track, she couldn't. And they're still sitting on my hard drive. And anyway, you just I think it's just a way to deal, as I said before, the uncertainty of being a writer. You really need your community. And it also, it's, as much as it's difficult to do this, comparison is like the death of joy. So it's so hard.
Odious. Comparisons are odious, I always say. Yeah.
It's so hard. Like, I remember years ago, I didn't know her, but a friend of mine was good friends with her. When Mila Goldberg's book Bee Season came out, I was like, I read it and I liked it. But then I found out she was being made into a movie with Juliette Binoche, who, as a French major, I studied in France. I speak French. She's one of my favorite actresses. I was like, oh my God, she's so lucky. I'm so jealous. but it didn't ruin my day. But like, it could have ruined my day if I had that sort of tendency.
Mhm.
But I mean, we all are prey to it anyway. So I think we just have to learn to balance. And I found that cheering someone on, even if I am envious, is really the best thing to do. Is just be like, I'm going to try to celebrate your good luck and your good fortune and your deserved success, because it makes me feel good. And also, it's better than just pouting alone.
Yeah. I I wanna point out Joshua Gershik, who is a wonderful, wonderful writer, has said something really disturbing, which is saying that,
Uh,
there's reports that publishers have stopped acquiring queer-themed manuscripts. Um, and I know that the LGBTQ community on Substack is phenomenal and their writing is phenomenal. So thank you for that point, Josh.
I've,
Yes,
I've
Substack is an oasis for a lot of people who are having trouble getting published in other avenues. And that idea, that's been my paranoia actually ever since Trump started, was that I've gotten all of these reassurances from editors that I know in the big five. Oh, no, it's not going to affect what we publish, but it has to affect what they publish. And so I think we're all, as writers, going to have to do more of this community, more banding together, more supporting
yeah,
each other. There's going to be much more reliance on small presses than there ever was. I mean, we're really going back in time to the days when, it's kind of guerrilla publishers, and it's awful. And I hope that this doesn't continue for very long. But it's terrifying. So we all really, really, really need each other right
we,
now, and
we
I'm really glad you're all here. This is turning into a great group. I'm seeing
I
a
know,
lot of people here. Yeah,
Michael. I see he's there.
right. Lots of
Uh,
friends.
yes. Well, one thing I wanted to say, this will seem potentially quite loopy, but this has helped me stay on an even keel. Some of you might have seen it surfaced after the election in the presidential election in November of 2024. There was this article written by a Vanity Fair writer. He's died, but he was their resident astrologer, and it was published in December of 2006. So 19 years earlier, or 18 years earlier at that point. And he predicted all the stuff that's happened in this year. He said 2025, it is going to be this upheaval that we've never seen before. And he tied it to the transit of Pluto. I'm not interested really in all this, but I'm curious. I don't spend a lot of time reading horoscopes and astrology stuff. But this article by this writer, Michael, I can't remember his last name, but it was so good. I mean, he was such a good writer, but he predicted all this that's happened and back in '06. And then he died on the day Judge Merchan excused, he let Trump off the hook with his 34 felony convictions. But before he died, he predicted that Trump would win the election, but that he would only last 2 years. So I have been clinging to this prediction with every ounce of energy in my body and psyche, basically. So you can find it if you Google Vanity Fair
Okay.
2000.
I'm
I have,
really hoping you're right.
yeah, I just, anyway.
All right. So we're more dependent than ever on small presses and literary journals to keep us sane. I have to, just as kind of a fangirl, I have to be honest. I am in awe of the places where you have published. You've published in the most illustrious of literary journals: Plowshares, New England Review, Southern Review. They're places that, I either wouldn't try, or when I try, I always get rejection notices. So I am asking you nakedly, what are your tips for submitting to those highfalutin places? How do you go about it?
I will tell you, I submitted to Plowshares for 10 years before they accepted a story. So
Oh, thank you for that. I
yeah,
really appreciate that.
you,
Okay.
and then that story that's in Plowshares was published in 2011 or 2010. I think it was 2011. So probably since the 90s. So maybe even 12 years or, it was a long time that I've been submitting. And since then, I've come close with a couple of other stories, but I've not made it in those pages again. And as far as New England Review and Southern Review, I just, I also submitted doggedly to both of them before my first acceptances with those journals. And so basically the trick is there is no trick. It's basically just keep writing new work, write the work that, with your full attention and heart, edit it, use your writers group if you have one, or just rely on your trusted reader, and then just doggedly submit. I've tried to place pieces in places like Virginia Quarterly Review, Sewanee Review, the Missouri Review, and never landed anything there. And I've been in Best American and O. Henry Prize stories. So I've had stories in each of those anthologies, which actually originally appeared in New England Review in both cases. And I cannot land anything. And all the two stories that were in those two storied anthologies, pun not intended, I had gotten multiple rejections for them. I had other work on submission with New England Review when I was submitting those stories elsewhere that eventually ended up at New England Review. So, and it took me 4 years to publish the piece that was in the 2008 Best American that Salman Rushdie edited. And, so I had written it, I think, in 2003. It went up in New England Review in 2007, and then it appeared in the Best American Anthology the following year. So, I mean, I had also just tried at that point. I wasn't writing as many. I wasn't trying. I was still writing poetry a fair amount. And then I wasn't working on novels as much as I do now. And I would try to write like 10 new short stories a year, maybe actually
Wow.
one a month.
Wow.
But,
That's a
I don't,
lot.
I was at that point too, I was still in my late 20s, early 30s when I was trying to do that. And I just had more energy. I think
Mhm.
as you get older, things are heavier. It's just harder.
And there are so many more distractions now than there used to be. I mean, I used to
Yeah.
be much more productive. I just can't be that productive in this climate. I can't do it. But do you have a strategy? Because I usually, when I get rejected, I view it as an opportunity to take the piece back and edit it again. Do you do that, or do you just finish once it's finished? It's done, and you're not going to touch it again.
It really depends. I think, at this point, I've published almost 100 stories in journals, and I've written probably at least twice that I haven't tried to send out or sent out and just given up on. And usually like this, there's a piece, the New England Review, the new issue, I have a story in it. And I wrote that story last winter. So a little less than a little less than a year ago. And I submitted it to Electric Literature recommended reading, where I've had one story. And I realized I sent it, even though I spent so much time writing it and revising it, I felt like this ending is not working. And sure enough, when it came back, the editor said, "This is really good, but it just doesn't feel like it's working." And by that point, I'd already written a new draft and sent it to New England Review. And even then, like, Carolyn Keebler accepted it, and she was happy with it. But I said, I just don't think the ending is quite right. So I did even more revision. So not a whole lot, but I changed the ending a little bit to make it a little more, it just worked better. So I think most of the time when I send something out, it's more polished. There might be a few things that I tweak a little bit if I do get rejections. But, I got my MFA in the late 90s, so it's been almost 30 years. I don't remember. I don't know when you got yours, probably
Later.
later.
I
Yeah.
was late. I was 50 in my 50s already. So I just got it in 2006.
I've been doing this so long now, and I've taught so many workshops that I basically feel like if I write a story and it's not good, I just don't send it out. So, and then,
No, though. You've been doing it long enough that
yeah,
you can really tell?
yeah. I mean, I can. Like, actually, it's funny because after, like, it'll be 2 years this summer, I wrote this goofy piece that I love, and my partner's he's a tough critic. He'll read it, and he's not a writer, but he's an avid reader. And he read the story that I've not been able to place yet. And I've sent it probably to close to a dozen journals. And he read it and he's like, I love this story so much. And I was shocked because he never says stuff like that. But nonetheless, I've not been able to publish it. It's very goofy. It's humorous, and humor is hard to, because it's so
Right.
subjective.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I know this is a good story, and one day I will find the right place. So it's just like, maybe it's just hubris, but I also know if I'm a pro, like you are too. I know what I'm doing, and I've read thousands of short stories and edited student work and also done some freelance editing for other writers. It's just immersive. Like, this is your life, you know? So like a baker, they know how to bake a great loaf of bread because they've
I
done
have
out
to say, I still have trouble having enough perspective on my own work. I still, you
maybe
know, I need to put it. I'm part of the put it in a drawer for a year and then look at it. I'm in that camp.
that's a good idea though. Like I think, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
As long as you're working on new stuff. If you
Yeah.
know, you're if it just keeps me on a more or less even keel to keep writing new work. And then, I'm actually reading the 2020 and the 2025 Best American Short Stories. I try to read them every year in sequence, but I just hadn't read the 2020 yet. And reading those anthologies also, like, oh, I want to write a story. And I keep a notebook where it's like most writers, we probably, like those of the writers here listening or watching, they have notebooks too where they keep ideas. And that it's just so important. I've had the same notebook for 25 years almost. And there's so much in there. So I just, yeah, you just you nourish yourself with other people's loopy imaginations and wonderful points of view and the strange, the necessary strangeness that John Gardner said fiction has to have to be good. I tell my students that every single quarter,
Mhm.
that you have to have a little bit of strangeness because
I
life,
always tell my students to interrogate the weird.
yeah, yeah, life
Yeah.
is strange. Like we
Yeah.
just random things all the time when you go outside. Like why did
Can I
someone a Jolly Rancher on your doorstep or something like
Can I ask you though, this is really interesting. If you have been reading these collections, the best of collections in sequence, have you seen trends in changing what constitutes the kind of short fiction that's getting published? Or I mean, I know that probably because editors tend to be on the younger side, especially with a lot of
that does
literary journals, they tend to kind of be, they stay young even though the journal gets old. And so it's a reflection of kind of the trends in younger literary readers. But have you seen any trends that you could identify?
one thing with the anthology Best American. And Carmela, thanks for that cute note. The that They are trying to be much more inclusive. Um, and the journals that have editors who are paid and have been there a long time, they tend to not be prone to faddish stuff. Like I have FADDISH. I have said this to my grad students that they should be aware, like submitting to journals edited by grad students, they're probably more likely to get an acceptance than some of the more established journals like VQR, Virginia Quarterly Review, or New England Review. Not always, it really depends, but those journals have paid editors. So most literary magazines at universities housed in MFA programs have great, people, and they're rotating and they're often younger. And so if you're writing stuff that's, it's just like the art world. I have a friend when I used to work at the School of the Art Institute, Susan Kraut, a painting professor there. She and I've talked about like the fact that anything earnest is in the art world is considered, oh, it's too earnest. It has to be ironic.
Mhm.
You know, and I think that sort of sarcasm or irony in writing is sometimes popular with
Mhm.
younger editors at literary magazines. This is just my own
Mhm.
theory. I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people who can say, no, that's not true at this journal, blah, 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 blah. But I have had those frustrations where I've sent something out and I'm like, you're not publishing stories as good as this one. Why don't you take it? So it's just you have to have like a balance of ego and humility. So it's you have to like think like this is a good story. I'm just going to be dogged. Like that's why I was published in Plowshares eventually after 10 or 12 years of submitting work to them. And I think I was submitting to New England Review for like 7 or 8 before they published my first piece.
Do
So
you think that they have their own? I mean, they always say read the journal before you submit. Do you feel that they have distinctly different styles and perspectives from journal to journal? Like you would pick one story for one journal rather than another because of the kind of things they publish? Is that? I mean,
I
you've
do,
published in so many, you would know.
yeah. Editorial preference. Like I remember when I was a grad student at Indiana University, the editor of the magazine, he had a point of view and he had, stuff that he liked. Like he was probably more likely to publish sort of subversive, humorous, quirky stories than someone probably succeeding him a couple of years later was. So I think, if there's a journal you really like, just keep submitting. Like if you really like it, you probably read it. So, or at least you read it occasionally. So just like I'm not giving up on the Missouri Review. I've gotten notes back from them too. Like one story that eventually appeared in Catamaran Literary Reader. I got a note and they said, "Oh, we almost took this." And the thing was, like I was certain that story was terrible. So I almost withdrew it. But then I looked at it after they gave me this note and I'm like, what was wrong with me? This actually was a good story. So,
I'm telling you, it's hard to gauge your own work.
yeah, in that case it was. But I had also had
Mhm.
this crazy experience with an editor at a different place that had undermined my ability to like see my writing clearly. And so I needed to sort of detox for a year.
Mhm.
And literally that was basically how long it took.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, it definitely can. All right, we are coming to the end of an hour. Christine, this has been really, really fun. And it's fun to see all the people who've joined us along the way. So um, I will publish this. We will publish the video tomorrow along with a recap of some of the best highlights of the talk. Before we go, you want to tell everybody when you publish and I don't say if you know what your next post is going to be about on
Thank you.
Bookish.
I hope you'll do the same too. I know you've got a piece going out tomorrow, you said. So, Writer in the World. I have a piece going up Friday, an interview with Ruyan Meng, who is a Chinese writer who that's actually a pen name because she was a political exile from China. So, her book, The Morgue Keeper, came out in October from 713 Books. And I publish every 6 days. So, yeah, I'm not really sure why I don't just publish once a week or like every Friday or something. I think I just sort of like the variety of a different day of the week. And you,
Oh, it's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, the post tomorrow is going to be our video. So I'm sort of bumping one of the regular ones for that, and I haven't quite decided what I'm going to write about. My last post was on careless people, bringing
Facebook.
together the
Yeah.
politics and the and memoir, but I was writing about not the content of the book so much as the way it was crafted, because I think one of the most important genres is narrative nonfiction and narrative nonfiction memoirs, which I call memoir with a mission, or MWAM. And Careless People is just a perfect model of that. And it's a difficult genre that falls between memoir and reportage and polemics. And it's actually, I think it's very popular with publishers, but it's very difficult for people to write, especially people who are kind of schooled in writing memoir, personal memoir. It's a
You know,
different animal.
speaking of which, that book by Cory Doctorow and Shittification, I'm almost done with it. It's very similar terrain to the Careless People Moyam
Mhm.
about Facebook. And I highly recommend it. It is so good. And Cory Doctorow is so funny, but he's also I was actually very jealous of how smart he is. As someone who considers myself above average intelligence wise, I was like, this guy is a genius. So
He also streams words. He writes
he's
just voluminously. I don't know how he does it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good book. It's about big
Great.
tech and all these things that I did not know. And I'm glad I know, but they're also harrowing. And I still have my Amazon subscription. So
Right.
that,
I hope you'll write about it on Bookish.
I,
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who's joined us, and see you soon. Bye.
thank you. Thanks, Aimee. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.